guys, so as you can tell from the title of this video, which actually at this time of filming I don't actually know what that's going to be, but we'll see. This is going to be a bookish video. Now, although I haven't been filming the last couple of weeks, like vlogish wise, I have been watching a lot of YouTube videos and I've kind of fallen into the bookish side of YouTube in the last couple of weeks. One of the channels I've watched does this series where she tries to balance her books, and that's where she tries to reduce her TBR, or at least not increase it. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what TBR stands for, it's to be read pile, or to be read list at least, so just your to be reads. And I thought that was a really good idea, and because I wanted ideas for this video, well, this channel, and the fact that I was doing like my bookish haul series last year and then along the similar lines, I thought I would give it a go. So yeah, the whole idea of this series is to compare what I start the month on, my TBR, and what I end it on. Now, the person who I got this idea off, she, like I said, she tries to balance them, so not to increase the list. Now, I'm not bothered. If my list goes up, it goes up, but for the most part I think it will go down. Now, this obviously is going to be the episode for January. I am a little late because it's now mid-February, but I just haven't had time to film. And yeah, so I started the year with 29 books on my TBR, I think. There might have been 30, but I'm pretty sure it was 29. And my aim by the end of the year is to get it down to under 10 and try to keep it under 10. But yeah, so I'm going to go through the books that I read, which are there, and I have the pile over there which I bought. And hopefully I can get that number 29 down when it came to the end of January. So yeah, the first book I finished was Walk in the Park by Jill Mansell. Now, I don't know whether I should tell you about what these books are because they'll just make the videos very long. But this is... yeah, so this book is about a woman called Lara who, when she was a teenager, dated this guy called Flynn. And she ended up pregnant, but they broke up before she got a chance to tell him, and she moved away. And this kind of sees how their relationship is 18 years later when she moves back to town with their now teenage daughter. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about the book. There's a lot more to it than that, but yeah, so that was the first book I finished this year. The second book I read was The Ticking Heart by Andrew Kaufman. Now, I've read quite a lot of Andrew Kaufman's books, and I do find them kind of hit and miss. This one I enjoyed, and one of his other books, Born Weird, is probably one of my favourites, but there are other books of his that I haven't quite been so fond of. But yeah, this one I enjoyed. So this one is about a guy called Charlie who's recently divorced from, well, recently 2 years previously divorced from his wife, and is now dating somebody else, but is not able to give her his whole heart. And in a cab he meets this stranger in a purple hat and gets transported to this magical land called Metaphoria. And now while he's there, he gets approached by a woman who needs him to help find her husband's heart. Now, as motivation, she rips out his heart and replaces it with a bomb, which is set to go off in 24 hours. So he has 24 hours to find this woman's husband's heart. If not, his will in effect explode. So yeah, it's a very interesting story, and yeah, I'm not going to go into any more detail than that, but it's an interesting read and like an interesting message within the book. So yeah, I'd give that one a go, and yeah, it was definitely a good book. So the next book I finished was Miss You by Katie, I think it's Ebeland, because it's really curly right and I can't quite make out the letters, but I'm pretty sure it's Ebeland. This book kind of switches point of views each chapter between two characters, and it's an interesting one. Like, you'd think it'd be about two lovers like maybe being separated, but that's not quite what the story is. They kind of have a fleeting meeting when they're teenagers, and their paths almost cross quite a lot as they grow up, but never quite. Like, a series of events happen to prevent them. So, not try and give too many spoilers, but one example of that is they were meant to be going to the same university and they would have been in the same halls, but something prevented her from going to university, which means they never got to meet again. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how their life stories kind of intersect, or almost intersect so often, but never quite get there. So it was an interesting story. I wouldn't say I loved it. I think I give it like a 3 or 4. So it was a good book and I did enjoy it, but it wasn't quite what I was expecting. But definitely a good read if that's the kind of thing you're into. So the next book I read was Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. I don't quite know how to explain this book like coherently. So it's about a black woman, it is relevant that I say that, called Queenie, and her, like, she's in her early 20s, and it's what she goes through, I think, over the course of a couple of months. It's about like her struggling with her mental health, her past, where she kind of had like an abusive childhood, and dealing with the prejudice she experienced in life. For example, one of the examples is she goes to a pool and she's the only black woman there, so she's made to feel very unwelcome as a result of that. So yeah, it was a very interesting book. Like I said, it's not from a feminist point of view, like I'm used to the prejudice of like what's expected from a woman from a man kind of thing, but it's not something I'd be familiar in regards to race because I am white. But yeah, it was interesting to kind of read that kind of perspective on how people treated her, and like I said, how it affects her mental health, like even within her family, the effect it had on her. And yeah, it was a very interesting read, and it would be something I'd recommend picking up if that's something you'd be interested in reading. So the next book I read, which I actually read the same day, is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. I couldn't say that then. This is a illustrated book. It's kind of like little, like you can see, it's just almost like a page per thing. It's not a continuous story, it's like almost like short stories, but I found it really sweet. Like I think it's aimed more at kids, but it's got a very interesting theme on it, and my favourite character was probably Mole because he has a very big cake obsession. So like literally the first page I turned to here is as you can see, I'm gonna just read this page to you to explain it. You kind of have like a coffee stain there. It is relevant. So the boy asks, "Is that the moon?" "It's a teacup stain," says the mole, "and where there's tea there's cake." And that's kind of the underlying thing. That's probably not a good example actually, but it's kind of this boy learning like what it means to be like a friend, and to be caring, and to be kind. And yeah, it's an interesting book, and definitely one I would recommend. Like I'm pretty sure this was Waterstone's book of the year last year. It was that good, and I can definitely see why. It's funny, but it has a lot of like lessons in it as well. So yeah, that's definitely one I'd recommend picking up. So the next book I read was TheFive by Haley Rubenhold. Now it does have a longer name, but I'm just going to call it TheFive. And this is all about the 5 victims of Jack the Ripper. And I found this really fascinating. Like I was always fascinated by history anyway, and obviously a lot of people know Jack the Ripper. But like it points out in this book, you know the story of Jack the Ripper and like his victims, but you don't actually know his victims' story, like what led to them, what happened in their lives up until they were killed. And this is what this book is about. It's the author's gone back and done research and looked into their lives up until they were killed, and it's really fascinating. It's kind of the prejudice of it. So it's always that thing, the Jack the Ripper was a prostitute killer, but through reading this book you find out that actually only one of the women he killed was a known prostitute. The others were just unlucky victims who just happened to be out at night. And yeah, it's got a really like, you get to read about like Victorian society and the effect that had. So all these women were from like working class backgrounds, and they could never get out of it no matter how hard they tried. The system was kind of stacked against them. And it's also got an underlying and very heavy towards the end feminist vibe in it, because not only was the system stacked against them because they were working class, it was stacked against them even more because they were women. And yeah, like I said, one of the things was they were all classed as prostitutes even though only one of them was a nude prostitute, and that was purely because any woman that was out at night and unaccompanied had to be a prostitute. That's the only reason she would be out at night. If a man was out at night, that's fine, but if a woman was out at night, then she must be up to no good. And the other example is one of the victims had, like, the first victim wanted to divorce her husband, but under, like, the way society was, divorce was frowned upon. Now, if a man wanted to divorce his wife, all he had to do was prove she was either drunk, like a drunkard, or that she'd been having an affair. That's all. He didn't even have to prove it, he just had to state one of those things and he could get a divorce easily. The woman, however, it wasn't so easy. Like, she knew her husband was having an affair, but that wasn't grounds for divorce. They wouldn't allow her divorce on that ground. She'd have to not only prove he was having an affair, like give evidence, but also prove that he was either a drunkard or that he was abusive. And if she didn't have evidence, then she couldn't get divorced. But then society was also messed up in the sense of, like I said, one of the examples, if she could prove she was being physically abused, then she might be able to get a divorce. But society also saw if a man hit his wife, it was also acceptable because it was just justifiable punishment for something. So the system was always stacked against her, and that's like an underlying theme within the book of how Victorian society, and still to this day in a sense, is stacked against working class people and women in particular. So yeah, I found that a really fascinating read, especially to hear like how the events that led to their deaths in the end. But yeah, if you're into history and want to know like a bit more about that, I definitely recommend picking that book up, because I did enjoy it a lot more than I thought I was going to, and I found it very informative. So the next book I read was The Tattoo of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This is a very popular book, so I don't really know whether to go into it. It's kind of self-explanatory. It's about this guy called Leal who ended up doing the tattoos on the prisoners of Auschwitz, the numbers, and his time in Auschwitz. It is a really interesting story, and I've read another book from, what was it, Librarian of Auschwitz, I read I think last month, or towards the end of last year, and it's an interesting insight into like what happened in Auschwitz and what some of the prisoners did just simply to survive, to last like longer even, and just to get by. And it was also interesting reading this after reading The Librarian of Auschwitz, because you see a lot of crossover. And yeah, it was interesting to see that, because when things are mentioned, oh yeah, I remember reading about that before. Now sometimes this book went into more details about something that one didn't, and vice versa. But yeah, I can see why this was a bestseller. It's definitely an interesting book, and yeah, I will be picking up the sequel, which is advertised there, once it's out in paperback. It's out in hardback at the moment, but I'm gonna wait till it comes in paperback. But yeah, it's definitely a good read, and like I said, I'm fascinated by history anyway, so anything to do, especially like World War II, I don't know why, so reading about like the stories from Auschwitz is just both harrowing and like fascinating at the same time. So yeah, that was definitely a good read, and I can see why it's a bestseller. So next book I picked up in a charity shop in December. I'd gone in because trying to find cheaper books, and this was one that I found, which is The Friend Zone by Abby Jameson. Yeah, this was a good book. I didn't quite know, I picked it up because I thought it might be a chance I like it, but I wasn't entirely sure. And yeah, it's definitely interesting. So it focuses on two characters, Josh and Kristen. It's mainly from Kristen's point of view, but it does go to Josh's a bit. And she's the maid of honour for her friend's wedding, and he's the best man. So that's kind of how they meet, but they actually meet just before that, because they actually have a little car accident with each other, literally going to the event. So yeah, it's an interesting book. Like, that's not a spoiler, it's literally the first chapter, and it's interesting just to see how they clearly had feelings for each other, but she's in a long distance relationship because her boyfriend was actually away in Afghanistan, I think it was. And it's just interesting to see how they obviously had chemistry for each other, but couldn't be together for various reasons. And it's, yeah, it was fun just to like see the like back and forth between the two and the 2 point of views. Yeah, like I said, I didn't quite know how I was going to feel about this book. I did enjoy it. I wouldn't say it was my favourite, but yeah, it was a good book and it was definitely worth picking up for me then. Now, the final book I read in January was Anansi Boys by Neil Gaiman. Now, I love Neil Gaiman. If you've watched this channel long enough, I've read quite a few of his books and I've got a few on my TBR. So yeah, this book is, well, the reason I picked up this book, let's start with that. When I was about 12, I was in a school play called Anansi Stories about this mischievous spider, and obviously when I saw Anansi on this title I thought, oh, and the picture of a spider, I thought, oh, maybe it's the same spider. Turns out it is. And yeah, it was kind of interesting to read about a character that I kind of already knew. And yeah, it's not so much about Anansi himself, it's about his two sons and how they interact with each other. So Charlie is mainly from Charlie's point of view, but his brother Spider does get a look in as well, quite a lot. And yeah, it's how Charlie's trying to undo some of the stuff, the mischief his father's done, and how the mischief of his father is now causing him trouble even in death. So yeah, it's an interesting book. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. It didn't quite go how I thought, like based on my knowledge from when I was in a play when I was 12. But yeah, it was nice to revisit a character that I was somewhat already familiar with. So those are the books I read in January, and if my math is right, that takes my TBR down to 20. So we're getting there, but sadly I did buy books in January, so it's not going to stay to 20 long. So one of the first books I picked up was Legendary by Stephanie Gerber. Now this is book 2 in a trilogy by this author. Now I've read Caraval. I want to say Carnival, I keep wanting to say Carnival, but I'm pretty sure it was Caraval. And that was book 1 and this is book 2. So I haven't read this yet, but I'm interested to see how it's going to be because I loved the first book. So I'm interested to see how this one goes. The same day, because these were both bought on my last trip to London, I picked up 13 Weddings by Page Toon. There's no real reason why I picked this up. I like Page Toon books and I hadn't read this one, so that was simply why I picked it up. Like I said, these books I haven't read yet, so I can't really tell you much about them, but I will obviously once I read them. Next book I picked up was 'Twas the Night Shift Before Christmas by Adam Kay. Now, at the time of filming this, I have actually read this, but I didn't read it till February, so I'm not going to tell you much about it now, but I'll tell you in the next episode. But yeah, this was a book that my friend and one of his friends at his stag do were talking about. And I'd kind of seen it floating around and heard about it, and I thought I'd give it a go. And yeah, the amount of times like I said, I'll go into more detail about what I thought about it, but yeah, it was a good book and I'm glad I picked it up. The next book is The Rosie Result by Graham Simpson. This, once again, is part of a trilogy. I've read The Rosie Project and then The Rosie Effect already last year, and I was just waiting on this to come out in paperback before I bought it. So yeah, once I saw this in the store, I picked it up, and I've peeled it off now, but it did come out on like an offer sticker on it, so it was like 2 books for £8, so I did pick up a second book. And the second book was the Cornish Cream Tea Bus by Crisinda McLaughlin. I want to say McLaughlin, I'm probably saying this name wrong, but yeah. I've passed this book, I picked it up quite a few times and just put it back, but Beans, the other book, had an offer sticker on it, and so did this one. I thought I'd pick it up because, like I said, it's one I kept coming back to, so I thought I'd finally give it and pick it up. So yeah, those were the books I hauled. Yeah, so I believe I'm now up to they now take me up my TBR back up to 25. So I managed to shift 4 books overall, which I'm happy with, but I've still got a long way to get my TBR down to 10. So I'm going to leave this video here because as you hear, my voice is kind of starting to go, and I will see you guys next month.